distinguished colleagues, I rise on a matter of personal and collective privilege, one that strikes at the very heart of public accountability, the integrity of our institutions, and the trust reposed upon us by the Filipino people. On September 25, 2025, former Speaker Martin Romualdez was implicated in the flood control scandal after retired Marine Sergeant Orly Gutesa testified during the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee hearing that the lawmaker is a leading figure in this scandal. Gutesa alleged that as a security aide to former Congressman Saldico, he was tasked to carry and deliver suitcases containing basura, a hideous term they used for files of cash, approximately amounting to 48 million pesos each. He recounted that on one occasion, they brought up 35 suitcases for delivery to a residence identified as that of Martin Romualdez at 40 McKinley Street, Taguig. For 7 months since he was implicated by Gutesa, the former speaker remained silent. Only now has he spoken through a video statement dated April 21, 2026, where he finally addressed the allegations surrounding what is now one of the largest systemic looting of the national treasury in our nation's history, the flood control scandal. Ngunit imbes na maliwanagan ang taong bayan, ang kanyang mga pahayag ay lalong nagbunga ng mas maraming tanong kaysa sagot, Ginoong Pangulo. At first glance, the statement appears to be a defense grounded in law, process, and institutional structure. But upon closer examination, Mr. President, this is not a clarification but a calculated narrative. And it is our duty as members of this chamber to dissect this narrative, expose its inconsistencies, and ensure that the truth is not buried beneath rhetoric. His justification for his prolonged silence, an alleged act of respect for the legal process. But lest we forget, this is the same individual who declined the invitation to appear before the Senate to answer questions under oath. The same individual bestowed upon the inter-parliamentary courtesy by the chairman of the Blue Ribbon Committee. Let us be clear. Respect for the legal process is not measured by selective participation. It is demonstrated through full and transparent cooperation, especially when public funds and national interests are at stake. Silence and inaction become complicity. He further claimed that he has cooperated with the Independent Commission for Infrastructure, or ICI, submitting affidavits and documents. But this alleged cooperation was done behind closed doors, without public scrutiny and without any verifiable records accessible to the Filipino people. Until now, when he conveniently authorizes its release. Why only now? Why at a time when the narrative is tightening, when testimonies are emerging, and when key personalities are poised to re-enter the jurisdiction of our laws? Mr. President, timing is everything. And in this case, timing speaks volumes. Let us now address the core of his defense, the claim that he cannot be the mastermind because the budget process is collective, multi-layered, and shared across branches of the government. The former speaker asked, how can I be the mastermind? But the question itself is revealing. By contesting only the label of being the mastermind, he implicitly concedes that he was part of the very system he enabled, the corruption in flood control projects. He deliberately tried to downplay the role of leadership within that process. The issue then is no longer whether wrongdoing was committed, but the extent of his role in allowing it. Mr. President, those of us who walk through the halls of Congress know this. Nothing moves in the House without the imprimatur of its leadership. The Speaker of the House is not a ceremonial figure. He is not a just passive participant. He is the central authority who controls the legislative agenda, influences committee outputs, and ultimately determines what reaches the plenary. To say that the Speaker is merely one voice among many is to paint a picture of the House that is devoid of reality. Mr. President, alam po nating lahat ang kalakaran sa Kongreso. Nasa kamay ng liderato ang kumpas na magpapasulong sa anumang inisyatibo. By asking how he can be the mastermind, the former Speaker hid behind the complexity of bureaucracy. He repeatedly and thoroughly discussed the entire budget process while also passing the blame to the executive in line with its oversight on implementation and in line with the principle of command responsibility. But, Mr. President, the records of previous congressional and Senate hearings can attest to the fact that corruption does exist within the entire budget process, from budget planning by the executive to budget deliberation by Congress to implementation by the agencies and down to the final scrutiny by the Commission on Audit. To be more specific, while the executive submits the budget proposal, the House leadership decides which amendments are made during the bicameral conference. This is where the real flood control happens, not in the control of rivers, but in the diversion of funds. Sir, the Speaker's defense further falls apart the moment he passes the buck to the former Senate President, Chis Escudero. Senator Escudero led this chamber from May 2024 to September 2025, thereby overseeing the Senate budget deliberations for only the 2025 national budget. Romualdez, on the other hand, served as the House Speaker from July 2022 to September 2025, overseeing the full cycle of 3 national budgets, 2023, 2024, and 2025. Mr. President, the former Speaker also issued a statement that should deeply concern this institution and the entire nation. He declared that he will not go alone and that he knows many things about the current and the past administrations. What does this mean? This is not only a tacit admission that he is part of the whole mess, but also his preparedness to drag all others involved with him. Para bang sinabi niya na kung babagsak man siya, Ginoong Pangulo, hindi siya papayag na siya lang ang mag-isa. Hihilahin din niya ang iba pababa kasama niya. Is this a veiled threat, Mr. President? Is this an admission of knowledge of broader wrongdoing? Or is this an attempt to leverage information as a shield against accountability? If he indeed has knowledge that could implicate others, then he has a duty, not a choice, to disclose it fully and immediately. Truth is not a bargaining chip, Mr. President. It is an obligation owed to the Filipino people. Mr. President, let us not be distracted by narratives of victimhood or claims of political persecution. The issue before us is simple. Public funds intended for flood control, funds meant to protect lives, livelihoods, and communities have been misused, diverted, or rendered ineffective through systemic anomalies. If you create, or worse, deliberately tolerate, as the Speaker, an environment where anomalies are allowed to fester and flourish, where corruption becomes blatant and normalized, then you are not merely complicit. You can be also a mastermind. If you appoint a committee chair who not only overlook the red flags but also helps facilitate widespread corruption, you are answerable. You cannot invoke command responsibility in other departments, yet isolate yourself from the doings of your own chamber. If you preside over a system where questionable allocations persist year after year, you are accountable. Mr. President, accountability cannot be selective. It cannot be convenient. And it certainly cannot be avoided through technicalities nor rhetoric maneuverings. The Filipino people are watching. They are demanding answers, and they deserve nothing less than the full truth. Ang sabi po nila, Ginoong Pangulo, huwag ninyo kaming linlangin. Huwag ninyo kaming paikutin. Ang katahimikan at pagbulag-bulagan ay hindi kawalang kaalaman, bagkus ito'y pakikiisa sa katiwalian. Kapag pikit mata o tikom bibig, ninyong hinayaang mag-ugat at mamayagpag ang anomalya, hindi po iyon inosenteng pagkukulang, kabilang na kayo sa sistemang nagbibigay daan sa paglaganap nito. Mr. President, this representation calls for a relentless pursuit of truth wherever the evidence leads, whoever it implicates, and whatever the consequences may be. Because in the end, the integrity of this institution and the future of our nation depend on it. Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo.